Do you remember what the one-liner was at the B?
I don't remember the exact one-liner, but I remember the essence of the pitch,
Yeah.
which was not a very good pitch. And by the way, this was not a very good fundraise. This was a terrible fundraise for us. I would say I did a bad job at the B, but I learned a lot, which I guess those often go together. But the pitch there essentially was, this is performance management that people actually like. Mm-hmm. And by the way, we're launching a new product. That was basically the pitch. It's not a great pitch.
Okay. Why did you go to market? Why did you decide to fundraise if you had a bad pitch?
We had no money.
It's a good reason.
This is in the summer of 2018. We're at 4-5 million of ARR, 40 people, something like this. So burn wasn't huge, but we had like a couple $1 million left.
Right.
And growth is actually good. That year we went from like 2 to 7 of ARR, which wasn't bad at the time. Like for some reason, like investors were just like, it doesn't, not interesting. I think now that would get funded more easily for whatever reason. But we were like really low on money. And so what we ended up needing to do that summer was, after like a false start trying to fundraise in summer of 18 without any sort of success, ended up doing a very small internal bridge and then made the company go profitable for a couple quarters. And it worked. And actually, it wasn't a bad thing. We built a ton of company muscle over those 6 months, getting to a point where we were actually profitable, still with not a lot of cash in the bank.
Right.
So I think in a lot of ways, we like did some of our best work then. But that was what happened. And then in the beginning of 2019, we finally got the term sheet for the B. And then, our bank account went from 2 to 17 or something like that. And that was really helpful.
Why did you go from a pretty tight, organized pitch, which is, hey, we do performance management, here's what we do. Why did you feel the need to say performance management plus a new product? Like, hey, we've got a new shiny thing coming.
It felt like what we were working on was meaningful. But when I looked ahead, I just couldn't see a way that performance management only for the mid-market was going to get us to something big enough. And credit to some VCs too, who at every step of the journey until we got to a certain scale, like everybody passed on Lattice. It's hard to name a VC firm that hasn't passed on Lattice. In this year period is when it all happened. And a big part of it was people would say, this is super SMB. It's really niche. You're serving startups. It feels like it's just like one small piece of this overall HR pie. HR is hard to sell to. We're not interested. And to the credit of that criticism, I do actually think that if we had just stayed in performance management, it would have never gotten to the scale it is now, at least. And so I looked around and I said, there's a lot of other products that feel adjacent, not unbelievably challenging to build, that would be accretive to the customer because they sit right there. And so we actually took a pretty big gamble by putting a lot of our engineering effort that year into this adjacent product of engagement surveys quietly, when we still had a lot to do in performance management, but we were just like, this breadth thing might be big for us. It turned out that the second we launched it, it was like an obvious winner for us, and then to such a degree that it then defined the strategy where now all we do is launch new products, strategically speaking. But yeah, so when we raised, we had to raise at a time because of our cash needs before the product was in market and mature. So it was a tough time to raise for us. It would have been better if we had a little bit more cash and we could have raised 6 months after the launch of this product.
Right. I do appreciate something in this, which is you see a lot of black and white conversation about VCs don't know anything. They'll never help you out. They'll never give you good feedback. And on the other side, VCs are brilliant. They'll game change your business. And the reality is much more in between somewhere. That there are instances where, hey, someone telling you the market is too small, they might actually be right. They might not know why they're right. They might not know how you can fix it. But if you hear it enough times and you're building a VC-backed business, you need it. You kind of have to figure out a way through it, right?
That's right. Because of what their role is and the kind of companies they see and the range of companies they interact with, they'll often smell smoke, even if they don't know the right diagnosis of that's actually the fire or that's the fire, but they can often smell a problem, I found. I think listening to VCs to an extreme extent would be a total mistake. At the same time, I think if you're hearing something really consistently from a lot of smart people who look at companies and markets professionally, I think that's also a mistake. It's like, listen when it makes sense to and don't when it doesn't. It's a little hard.
I mean, it's true of all advice, right? Like, listen to the advice, but don't take it all literally. You got to apply it to your own situation based on your expertise. But when you were hearing this feedback, and a lot of it was coming in the course of maybe preliminary fundraising conversations or fundraising conversations, did any investor say to you, you should go build an engagement product?
Not only that, they didn't even say you should build another product.
It was just passed as like,
said,
have fun, small business, enjoy yourself.
Pretty much.
Okay.
You're going to be tinkering around. You're going to stall at 10 million of ARR.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Okay. When did you go back out?
Went back out in like October.
Okay.
And signed it in like the beginning of the year, right at the beginning of the year.
So then October, November, December, January term sheet.
Yeah.
How many funds did you pitch over the course of that time? Do you remember?
20.
Okay. How'd you meet those investors that you pitched? And were any of them the same investors that you'd coffee chatted over the summer?
Yes. A lot of them had been the same ones from the coffee chat. A lot of them had been inbounds that I had been collecting over the previous year. Mm-hmm. A lot of them were intros from existing investors.
What category was Shasta?
I was friends from college with a guy, Nikhil Basuchevetti, who worked there. And so that was like a historical relationship who I already knew. So I had a few like that where I just like randomly had a friend or a relationship there. And I will say I do think that actually helped quite a bit, even though he wasn't the one who ultimately like sponsored the deal or, led it. He was a huge force in the background being like, yo, even though there's like some stuff you still don't like about this, you should, I think that helped a lot.
Was there anything that surprised you over the course of getting to know investors? Were they, in fact, completely different kinds of human?
I hesitate to call them entirely different kinds of humans just because it feels a little strong, but I am not jumping on saying no to that either for some reason. And I think part of the reason why is the orientation of what they're focused on as a job it's really quite different than what a founder's focused on. Like they're really different jobs. There's this major overlap, of course, where we're both talking about businesses, but it's a different feel to it. And so I do think I matured a lot in my understanding of how to interact with investors through that process, where I think I updated my thinking to go from I'm going to treat this very much like I would treat, like recruiting a candidate or selling a customer or like whatever, to something that's a bit more, I hate to say it, but it's a bit more transactional. It's a bit more, my goal here is to show you that there is a high enough probability that you're going to make enough on this investment that the overall expected value of this thing looks better than your next best choice. And I don't think I approached it that way from the beginning. And I think in later rounds, not in a callous way or something like that, but just in this is what we're trading, dollars for equity here. It's not about a lot of the other intangibles quite as much.
There's often a weird line, and you probably had some of this with Nikhil, given that he'd been a friend for a long time, where I think people confuse friends with investors. Like, oh, this person is my friend, therefore they'll give me money, or this person is my friend, therefore I should tell them everything about what's going on in my head. How do you manage that kind of messy thing? Because the reality is a lot of founders are friends socially with the investors and vice versa. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's one of the trickier things, and there's this in general with your investors, particularly once they're current investors, you're very much on the same side of the table. But there is a certain realization and there's a certain like breaking of innocence that happens. At least it did for me in this round, of realizing I've got a responsibility in this round, and it's not to these investors who aren't part of the cap table yet. It's a responsibility to the company. And that's going to feel a little uncomfortable, and particularly if you're somebody who is really likes people and you like relationships and you want to interact with people in these very human ways, then I think it can be a jarring experience to operate optimally. When operating optimally does mean sometimes making sure that, an investor says, hey, would you mind sharing those materials with me? And normal human interaction, yeah, you got it. I'll send them right over. Good founder fundraising interaction is absolutely, I'm sharing materials with all the investors next Thursday at 2. And we'll be talking about term sheets after Monday partner meetings, Monday at 3. Are you going to have time between that Thursday and that Monday to review the materials when I send them?
But Jack, we love the business. Like, we're basically ready for the decision. Can you just give me this information? We'll get you an answer. Forget about those guys. We've known each other for years.
Yeah, and we are, just in fairness to the process and to the business, this is how we're running things, and we just want everyone to have a look at the same time. And so that's why we're sharing materials to all interested parties at once. And that's going to be on Thursday.
See, and it's interesting because you talk about this, that, the seed round, demo day, pressure of demo day, you get it done beforehand, and there's this weird hype machine going. Your A was preempted. Your B was really the first time you had to think about how to do this. It makes sense that it was really hard to do.
Totally. It was the first time I had done it in a real way. I had no experience with it yet. And my nature is not in harmony with this. It required me to build skills on top of my defaults. There are founders whose default operations are designed pitch perfect to fundraising, and that's great. And if you're not, you need the self-awareness to know going into it for your first time, I am not designed for this. And you got to have people around you that you trust, that you listen to, who you're like, okay, I'm going to believe you that I need to be coached on these things. I'm going to get there. And so it's just a process.
Yeah. So there were about 20 pitches. How many full partnerships did you end up presenting to?
Probably like 5.
And how many offers did you end up with?
1 credible offer.
And I love this because here you are. I know it was painful at the time, so I don't love that what was going on at the time. But here you are, running a great company, lots of fundraising. You've raised hundreds of millions of dollars, I think, at this point. And I think the narrative that people have in their head that someone who's good at fundraising has always been good at fundraising, that every round is hyper competitive. Lattice, it's this monster. Everyone's always wanted to fund. It's like, no, it's hard. And there was one freaking good offer, one credible offer, and you needed it. And luckily it was a good offer from a good investor, right?
Yeah, they're a fantastic investor. They've been a phenomenal partner. And so it worked out great. And yes, I wish we diluted less, but in the scheme of things, doesn't make a difference. And so it worked out, but I will, even talking about this story is like bringing up this like painful reaction for me, because I'm like, ugh, if I could just send my current brain back now, I could have just done so much better. But it's such an unnatural process, and you do it like a few times. I think about this with parenting. I'm like, as a parent for your first time dealing with like a 2-year-old, you are like, whoa, I got to learn all these weird things to how to operate with a 2-year-old. And then by the time you've learned them, there's 3, and now it's a different set of things.